ADHD is not an uncommon disorder, yet many adults struggle to get diagnosed, and 80% of adults with ADHD find it hard to get help. That was the experience of Green MP Chloe Swarbrick, who only realised she had the disorder after a party event. And she's with us in studio today alongside psychiatrist Dr. Greg Finucane. Thank you both so much for being with us this morning. Chloe, at a party. So what actually,
not
what
a party. So I was approached by a phenomenal advocate in the ADHD space called Rory, and they came forward to me as the mental health spokesperson for the Greens and was making a presentation on the basis that this is how difficult it is for people with ADHD and the mental health system, and the health system actually, writ large, and the education system and the criminal justice system. Here's the issues with misdiagnosis and everything else. And as I was sitting through this presentation, a few light bulbs started going off in my head as somebody who had been diagnosed with depression several years earlier, and also had had a number of my female friends diagnosed with ADHD over the past kind of year. So I kept in contact with Rory and did a few kind of self-diagnosis tests and quizzes online, which I know, is not in and of itself any way, shape or form a replacement for clinical diagnosis, but still can help to affirm you in your journey. And then started the process of talking to my GP and my psychologist and getting quite freaked out about the fact that on paper and ostensibly I look like somebody who is relatively successful and okay. And yeah, just started collecting in my notebook a set of facts that I thought could help convince me to get my GP to make that referral to a psychiatrist.
So you go where you want to go with this, but what I'm interested in, because I know there'll be some people watching this who, like you, listening to somebody speaking and going, oh, tick, 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 wow. So what was life like for you before the diagnosis? What was going on for you?
Well, I think it's been an interesting experience and journey for my friends, my partner and my family as well, for whom there's also been a lot of affirmation for the experiences that they have had in living and working and experiencing life alongside somebody who is experiencing undiagnosed ADHD. So my kind of sense of compulsion to interrupt things when there is a light bulb going off in my head about a contribution that must be made, my kind of hyper focus, the fact that I can become relatively irritable when interrupted in the middle of a task, and obviously also the fact that I really find my sense of enjoyment in spinning a million plates at any given time. So I guess, if you were to come up with a kind of job that was good for that, where you could pursue a lot of your passions and also have somebody help you with your admin, Member of Parliament works all right.
Dr. Finucane, how common is this for us to go undiagnosed?
Yeah, relatively common, it has to be said. When I was first training in psychiatry, the professor of psychiatry in Auckland was John Werry, who'd done quite a lot of research in ADHD starting back in the States with some of the early studies on tricyclics and methylphenidate, that kind of thing. And there was a sort of a general assumption that everybody grew out of it once they hit adulthood, once their brains matured and they sort of myelinated up their frontal lobes and that kind of thing, that people were generally fine. And so it's sort of really been the last 25, 30 years people have figured out that's not really the case, and that in fact it's less likely to people are less likely to completely grow out of it than actually to keep demonstrating some symptoms in adult life. And about sort of 15, 20 years ago, of course, it was the males with ADHD who were getting in trouble all around the place and ending up in the prison system and that kind of thing. And it became more obvious that there was that group with adult ADHD. But of course, the women have tended to be quieter and sit at home and wonder why things aren't working out for them and that kind of thing. And so that is the group now, really, the last few years, that's been coming through more for diagnosis. But there isn't really a good system for supporting GPs and others to identify cases and get the diagnosis and find appropriate treatment.
What are the consequences of going undiagnosed for a lot of people?
That's a good question. So what the research seems to show is that if you take children at about the age of 10 or 12, something like that, and look at their symptom profile, it's mostly just the ADHD symptoms. If you then look at people at around the age of 40, it's all the ADHD symptoms, but also anxiety and depression and all these other things that have built up over the years of trying to push through the day with bees in your head.
But not understanding, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Gosh. So what do we need to get right?
Well, because it's a, as you said, not uncommon condition, and I would say probably the evidence is showing roughly about 5% of children and maybe about 3% of adults. And given that the secondary mental health and addiction services are funded to, cope with mental health problems in about 3%, 4%, you can't expect that to do that. So most of it has to be in primary care, but that means educating and supporting primary care practitioners. And you could try all kinds of things, couldn't you? And they're being tried around the world, but we just need a program of trying a few things and seeing what works for Aotearoa, New Zealand. Say nurse-led clinics, nurse practitioners leading clinics. That's going to be cheaper than expecting GPs to do all the diagnoses. And if you put the right criteria in place and say, look, as long as you meet all of this, then we'll delegate that diagnosing to you. Just let us know when there's something a bit curly or if something doesn't quite make sense or whatever, because at the top end it can be quite a complex condition. So we're finding that a higher proportion of people, for example, with certain kinds of epilepsy also have ADHD at the same time, and this was not anything that was ever identified in neurology clinics or treated. And yet, you've already got epilepsy, why not, you're going to treat that, why not treat the ADHD as well, etc. The overlap with ASD, etc. So it can be quite complex at the top end. But we need some way of, supporting primary care to do a lot of the work.
Chloe, what's it like now, knowing that you've had the diagnosis? So, what's life like on this side?
Well, first and foremost, the ability to forgive yourself for things that you were kind of blaming as deficiencies in the way that you operated and who you are. I guess, kind of misdiagnosed with depression. It's also very common for people who don't have that diagnosis to end up, kind of abusing substances and all kinds of things. And I've been relatively open about the fact that as a teenager, for me, that looked like alcohol. And I think that all of those things have meant that now at this point in my life, particularly after having gone through that journey and all of that rigmarole, being able to have those conversations with my family and kind of explain and unpack this stuff and have an element of forgiveness for myself too, has been incredibly affirming. But to the points just made before about kind of the processes, particularly diagnostically and from a prescription perspective of the experts and professionals inside of our system, there is massive challenges as somebody with ADHD in trying to get a diagnosis for ADHD, let alone even enabling yourself to believe that that might be something that you might have. If you were to design a system that was navigable for somebody with ADHD, it would not look like the one that we currently have, because alongside the fact that 80% of New Zealanders who do have ADHD struggle in navigating through the system, that's ADHD NZ research, it's also the case that a third of adults give up along the way, and that is a huge number of people for whom they're not getting the help that they need or that kind of legitimising experience that I had. We also experienced in the 90s, the late 90s, as a result of kind of an imported moral panic, fear about misuse of stimulants amongst college students in the United States, and a bunch of anecdotal kind of evidence from people inside of our education system, and not all too much real life data. There were some unnecessary changes, I think, to our prescription methodologies in Aotearoa, which were born out of moral panic and kind of a war on drugs ethos, as opposed to creating a system that would work better both for patients and for experts.
Gosh,